All right, we're recording. And if you're interested, we will be uploading this recording to our YouTube playlist for Maryland's BEPS program. And so you can view the recording from today's webinar, as well as the slides that we're going to run through, and all of the links that we share will be made available in the description of the video on YouTube. So let me just drop the link here. So hopefully you can all see that. Just drop the link for our YouTube playlist. So today's webinar, we're going to have about 30 minutes of a presentation for you, and then we're going to move into some Q&A for the latter half of the session. To access the Q&A feature, you are going to go to the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. There's a button called Meeting Tools. It looks like 9 dots in a square. You're going to click on that button and select Q&A, and you can let us know what you're thinking in there, and we will work to address those questions as they come in during the latter half of the session. And so also, and just want to introduce myself, my name is Sam Furio. I am the Outreach Coordinator for the Building Decarbonization Division at the Maryland Department of the Environment. Our division is responsible for implementing and developing this building energy performance standards for the state. I'm also joined here today by our Division Chief of the Building Decarbonization Division, Dr. Zach Bazzola.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Zach. And Zach, before we move into Q&A, Zach will be running some tips and tricks for everyone on getting started with BEPS and some useful need-to-knows as you're getting information set up and ready to go. So we'll hand it off to Zach a little later, but I'm going to start by running you all through an overview of Maryland's BEPS program. So today I'm going to talk about kind of a background of Maryland's BEPS policy and how it came to be and the basics of the policy. We're going to talk about what building owners need to know, specifically owners of these buildings covered by this policy, and what building owners and energy service providers need to know to get started. And then finally, resources that are useful for building owners and also service providers. So first things first, that background on Maryland's BEPS program, how it came to be. So the Maryland General Assembly back in 2022 passed the Climate Solutions Now Act, which set Maryland on a new path to reduce its climate pollution. That act set some of the most ambitious climate goals in the country, and it established these goals for Maryland of reducing its statewide greenhouse gas emissions by 60% by 2031 compared to 2006 levels, and achieving net zero emissions economy-wide by 2045 compared to those 2006 levels. So as a part of this act that was passed in 2022, in addition to these goals, the act also required our agency, Maryland Department of the Environment, to implement a building energy performance standards program for large buildings in the state. And this program, as well as other proposed decarbonization policies, will play a critical role in reducing emissions from Maryland's building sector and achieving the statewide greenhouse gas reduction goals. If you're interested in reading about Maryland's plan to reduce its climate pollution, you can read the Climate Pollution Reduction Plan on our website today. Again, BEPS and these other policies are just a piece of that puzzle, but if you want to read about the full puzzle, you can find that online. But today we are talking about building energy performance standards, which I'm sure a lot of you are aware of this type of policy, as other jurisdictions around the nation have enacted BPS policies, building performance standards, and this one is specific to Maryland. And this policy went into effect for the state at the end of 2024, December 2024, and it aims to reduce emissions from large buildings in the state, reduce energy costs for Marylanders, and improve air quality for Marylanders. As I said, the program focuses on large buildings in the state, and these buildings are those 35,000 square feet or larger, excluding any parking garage area. And these large buildings we call covered buildings because they're covered by the policy. These covered buildings have a suite of requirements, and their first requirement is to start annually submitting a benchmarking report to our agency, and that starts this year, 2025. These first benchmarking reports are due to MDE by September 30th, 2025, so just about a week away. And in addition to these benchmarking requirements, in 5 years, building owners will need to start meeting phased emissions targets in 2030 and beyond, or pay for their excess emissions over those targets. So what do the performance standards look like? As I just said, these performance standards will start in 5 years in 2030 and beyond. For these first 5 years, building owners are just benchmarking. We like to say that building owners have a long runway. Again, there's 5 years where you're just submitting data about your energy performance. And then starting in 2030, buildings are going to have to meet a phased reduction of on-site direct emissions by the type of building. This program is focusing on direct emissions. That's combustion that's taking place on site, and it also includes emissions from connected district energy systems. So starting in 2030 to 2034, buildings will need to meet the highest allotment of emissions for their property type. That's interim standard 1. Interim standard 2, that emissions allotment is going to tighten. And then finally, in 2040 and beyond, all buildings, regardless of property type, are going to have to meet net zero direct emissions. So again, back to this long runway visual, we model that a third of Maryland's covered building stock is already meeting this final standard of net zero direct emissions. So it's possible that when building owners or your clients, or you start benchmarking for your clients, it's possible they're already meeting that final standard, and or maybe they're meeting one of the earlier interim standards, so that runway to compliance lengthens for them. Additionally, our agency intends to adopt an energy efficiency standard that I'm sure you all have come across before. It's called Site Energy Use Intensity, or EUI. We intend to adopt that standard in 2027. It again wouldn't start until 2030. But as buildings are starting to assess how they're performing, we recommend not installing inefficient electric equipment like electric resistance heating. So I mentioned earlier on a couple slides ago that buildings could opt to pay for their excess emissions over that direct emissions standard. So this is an alternative compliance pathway. Building owners can pay for their excess emissions and still be fully in compliance with the regulation. So this payment structure is available for the net direct emissions standard in the form of payments set at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's social cost of greenhouse gas. These rates are the lowest permitted by law. So you can see the pricing structure on the table and on the screen. So let's say building owner Jane, or you starts benchmarking, or you start benchmarking for them, and for her office space, she is emitting 2 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent over her office space standard in 2030. So she would pay $460 in alternative compliance payments for that benchmarking year. So just 230 times 2. These prices go up by $4 each year, and all figures are in 2020 dollars, and will be adjusted for inflation to that year. So a little bit deeper into this alternative compliance payment option for building owners. Again, this is a flexibility option for building owners to make, to allow them to make the most cost-effective decisions as possible. So put yourself in a building owner's shoes for a second, and I'm going to walk you through kind of a decision-making process or example. Building owner Jane is determining the best next steps for her building. And we have this compliance spectrum up on the screen, and on the right side of the screen, we have what we consider to be ideal, and that is where the building owner is already meeting the standards or making improvements to meet the standard. And that's ideal because, again, we're aiming to reduce emissions in Maryland to meet our state's climate goals. On the other side of the spectrum, we have what we view as undesirable. This is where the building owner is not currently meeting the standards and makes no improvements to their property. They opt to meet compliance by making the payment for the difference between the standard and their total emissions. Again, this is a totally viable way to comply with the regulation, but undesirable because we're not reducing emissions from Maryland's building sector. Somewhere along the middle of this spectrum, we're going to have, I think, the majority of buildings fall, and that is where a building owner is already nearly in compliance or opts to make improvements to their property until they deem it as more cost effective to make the payment on the remaining emissions over the standard. So this payment option is a flexibility option for building owners to determine what's most cost effective for them. A little deeper into the alternative compliance payment. So back with building owner Jane, she is determining what's best for her throughout this program. As you can see on this chart, we've got the 4 periods of this program. We've got the baseline period from 2025 to 2030. That's where you're just only benchmarking. And then the standards start in 2030 and beyond, and in interim standard 1, interim standard 2, and then the final standard in 2040 and beyond. So as I said, benchmarking started this year. So building owner Jane starts benchmarking in 2025. She determines her building is emitting 1.25 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per square foot. She can see the emission standard she needs to hit in 2030 and beyond. They're in the regulation today. And she determines she can achieve that first standard by doing a retro commissioning and envelope improvement project. So she reduces her building's emissions profile below that standard. And as she approaches interim standard 2, she assesses what else she can do on site and the life cycle of her systems, and determines it's going to make more sense for her to pay for her excess emissions for the first 3 years of that interim standard 2 until she can do a full systems replacement at the end of the system life. So in 2038, she does a full systems replacement, and in 2040, she is meeting that final standard of net zero direct emissions. So that is just kind of an example of what a building could experience throughout this BEPS program and how they can use this alternative compliance payment to make cost-effective decisions. All right, so I just threw a lot at you with the standards and the payments and a little bit of technical information. So I want to pull you back out for a second, take a breather, and just talk about what these covered buildings look like around the state. So again, I said these are large buildings that are 35,000 square feet or larger, excluding any parking garage area. This program only applies to commercial and multifamily buildings. So we model that there are over 9,000 of these covered buildings in the state, and predominantly they take shape as warehouses, office spaces, multifamily housing, and retail stores. And just note that that housing is multifamily housing. Single family housing is not included in the program. So where are these covered buildings located in the state of Maryland? If you are outside of the state of Maryland, that is okay. Just a little bit of a geography lesson for the state. There's 24 counties in the state, and these covered buildings are located in every county. The predominant or the majority of these covered buildings are located between Baltimore, kind of in the northern portion of Maryland, and Washington, D.C., that approaches kind of the southwest corner. And that is where most of these buildings are located, and along the Interstate 95 corridor that connects both cities. So that's the vast majority of the building stock there, but they are in every county in the state. So do all buildings that are over 35,000 square feet need to meet the requirements? Not necessarily. There are certain building types that can apply to be exempted if they are over that size threshold. And so that is buildings that are designated as historic, individually designated by state, federal, or local law, public or non-public elementary and secondary schools, basically K-12 schools, manufacturing buildings, agricultural buildings, demolished buildings, and buildings owned by the federal government can all apply to be totally exempt from the program. Additionally, so I talked about those, maybe talked about too much, those emissions payments for excess emissions over the standards. Affordable housing providers within the state can apply for reduced emissions payments at a lower amount than those numbers I showed you earlier, or even zero. So they do have to be an affordable housing provider in the state. Additionally, buildings experiencing financial distress or low or no occupancy can apply annually for additional exemptions. So let's say you've got a covered building, or you're benchmarking for a client and their building's covered and they're not eligible for any exemptions, and they need to benchmark with the state annually. Well, as I'm assuming a lot of you know, there's certain, if you're benchmarking in Energy Star Portfolio Manager, there's certain energy exclusions that can be, removed or omitted from a building's profile. So for our program, energy exclusions include energy use associated with a food service facility, electric vehicle charging, the heating of outdoor pools, energy use associated with parking lots. If a state or federal regulation requires a building to have combustion equipment that specifically runs on combustible fuels, the state or federal reg has to require it runs on combustible fuels. The energy use and emissions can be excluded from that required equipment. And then also our chosen benchmarking tool is Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and there are other exclusions that can be made from a building's profile that are specific to Portfolio Manager. You can read about those in our technical documentation. So additionally, I don't know how many of you are in Maryland or outside of Maryland, but maybe you've been staying up to date on Maryland's policy change, but and during our last legislative session, a bill was introduced and passed that made some changes to this BEPS program, and these changes will become effective this October 1st, 2025. So just following up on those exemptions and exclusions, there will be a total exemption for buildings in Montgomery County. Montgomery County is a county within the state that has its own BPS policy. There is a total exemption available now for hospitals. They would have to apply for that. And exemptions from the energy use intensity and also potentially the reporting requirements for buildings that have sensitive compartmented information facilities, or a SCIF. Additionally, building owners will need to pay $100 per covered building they report. And along the lines of those energy exclusions, certain facilities can now exclude the energy use associated with steam sterilization equipment and also backup generators for the time when those backup generators are operating during a blackout. And finally, there are new credits available for building owners for on-site renewables that can be used against the energy use intensity standard, and also the on-site use of biomethane for the net direct emissions standard. So those are new changes that resulted from our last legislative session, and they'll go into effect here soon on October 1st. So how do building owners start in this program, and what tools do they need to use, or what tools might you need to use if you decide to represent building owners in this program? So on the screen, I've got kind of a visual of what the data process is going to look like for building owners and their representatives. There's really two main tools that building owners are going to have to use in this program. There is MD BEPS Portal, that is our own in-house tool that houses the covered buildings list. That is our best effort to date at mapping the buildings in the state that will need to comply with the program. This will also be the tool where if you're going to pursue an exemption, this is where you're going to submit forms to us. And also, if you need the benchmark, this is where you're going to have to find your unique building ID that we generate for the buildings so we can track their submissions. So that's the MD BEPS portal. Energy Star Portfolio Manager is that other tool, which I think you are all probably aware of, a free tool from the US EPA that is our chosen benchmarking tool for this program. So that is where building owners and their representatives are going to submit all of their energy use data to us annually. No energy use data goes through the BEPS portal. That is really just for submitting forms and getting that unique building ID. I would note that if you're going to start accessing the BEPS portal here soon, the covered buildings list, again, is our best effort to date at mapping all the buildings in the state. That will be part of the program. If a building isn't listed, that doesn't mean it doesn't have to comply. So if a building meets the definition of a covered building, it's 35,000 square feet or larger, excluding any parking garage area, and it's not on the list, it will need to be added to the list. So we have guidance on doing that. There's also guidance within the BEPS portal on adding buildings to the list if you need to do that. Those are the two main tools that building owners and reps are going to have to use for this program. Just a way to think about it is BEPS portal is the hardware store. It's where you're going to go to get the tools you need to get the job done. Energy Star Portfolio Manager is the project site. That's where you're going to go to construct and finalize the project. So getting started, just hammering this home, BEPS portal is the first place to go. That is, first step for building owners and reps is determining if you've got a covered building, if your building needs to comply with this regulation. And maybe it's already listed in our covered buildings list, or maybe it needs to be added. But associating yourself with the BEPS portal is a good way to get started. We just released a new user guide for the BEPS portal that walks you through kind of all you need to know about it. Links for this are available in this PDF when we will upload this recording to our YouTube channel. But this is also easily found on our webpage. So I'd recommend getting started with the BEPS portal. And then Energy Star Portfolio Manager. I think a lot of you may already be acquainted with Energy Star Portfolio Manager or be listed as service providers in their directory. But if you're not acquainted with Energy Star Portfolio Manager, this is how data is being submitted to us for this program. There's great free online trainings for this tool that you can take advantage of today. And there's, I think a lot of you are service providers and may either be listed in the provider directory or might want to be listed in the service provider directory. But just something to note is, we do reference this directory as a resource for building owners. So if you are listed in there, it may be worth ensuring that your information is, up to date and correct, so folks can get in touch with you if they need assistance. But this is available today, and so I'd recommend getting started with Portfolio Manager for your clients and getting skeletons set up for your buildings, because once you get kind of the profile set up for your building, then you're going to need to get the energy use data for the covered building and load it into Portfolio Manager. If you've worked with other BPS policies around the country, you may be familiar with this process, but specifically for Maryland, electric and gas companies are required to provide this energy use data to building owners upon request to fulfill the requirements of this program. So hopefully folks don't need to manually enter all of their energy use for their buildings into Portfolio Manager. They can request it from their provider and have it sent directly to Portfolio Manager or uploaded as a spreadsheet to Portfolio Manager. These electric and gas companies have 90 days to provide this data upon request in 2025 and 30 days every year after this year. We have a document online called Connecting with Your Energy Data Provider, also linked here in these slides, that outlines all of the utilities in the state and their data request processes for building owners. We are hearing that the majority of these utilities are turning around the data requests within just a few days. So if you're already trying to benchmark for folks in the state, that process has been, we have heard that it's been pretty quick, but they do have 90 days to provide that data upon request this year. So additionally, not this year, but next year, starting in 2026, building owners are going to have their benchmarking reports verified by a third party. This requirement is again going to start next year for the June 1st, 2026 benchmarking deadline. Building owners will be submitting their 2025 energy use data by June 1st, 2026. That report will need to be verified by a third party, and it will be required every 5 years starting next year. This third-party verifier that these building owners will have to seek out must meet certain credentials. Those credentials are the following: that's professional engineer issued within the United States, a licensed architect issued within the United States, a certified energy manager or CEM, and a building energy assessment professional. So those are the credentials for acting as a third-party verifier. If you are already benchmarking for a client within the state, you can also act as the verifier. You just have to have the credentials that I just mentioned. The building owner's internal employees cannot act as a verifier. The key term being third party here, it needs to be outside of the building owner's organization. We will be hosting, as a part of our benchmarking and reporting working group that has been active for about 1.5 years now, an upcoming webinar specifically on third-party verification. So if you would like to receive updates on that working group and get access to this webinar, you can sign up for our email lists and receive notifications of that webinar and other webinars. I'll also add the calendar link in the chat here. So if you'd like to sign up for that, it'll be later in October, but specifically October 23rd at 10 a.m. But that could be a good resource for folks if you have those credentials or pursuing those credentials to act as a third-party verifier for building owners. So I'd recommend you tune into that if you're interested. So that's the third-party verification requirement for the state. Kind of pulling it back to the benchmarking requirement. What does submitting a report look like for us, and what happens if you don't submit a report this year or any other year? So failure to submit a benchmarking report is considered as a violation against the regulation. Enforcement may range from warnings to fees. This year, we obviously understand this is the first year of the program. There's a lot of new processes in place, and folks are getting things stood up. So these 2025 submissions will be accepted through September 30th, and if additional time is needed, building owners or the representatives can submit a data correction request form on the BEPS portal. In the form, they'll need to include in a other text box description of the issue and any supporting documentation, and their anticipated reporting date for their 2024 calendar year energy use data. If you're already ingrained with our program or, taking steps to benchmark, if you're already waiting on one of those unique building IDs to be generated, let's say your client has a covered building, but it wasn't on that covered buildings list and you had to request a unique building ID. If you're waiting on that to be generated, don't worry. We're gonna, we need time to process those UBIDs and generate them, and we're gonna email them back to, the primary contact on the request. That can be the building owner or the provider or energy service provider. And once we send that, you'll have 30 days to finalize that benchmarking report or request more time beyond that. Let's say you submitted an exemption form. You're representing building owner Jane, and she's got a manufacturing building that she thinks applies for the exemption. And so you submitted an exemption form on her behalf. Submitting an exemption form is seen as being compliant for the benchmarking deadline for this year. Really, you just need to wait for our email on that determination. If the building is determined exempt, it's, depending on the exemption, let's say it's the manufacturing, it's totally exempt from the program. If it's determined not exempt, then you'll just need to, play catch up and by the next benchmarking deadline, submit for that current year and any previous years. So that's kind of how non-compliance with the benchmarking deadline works, and additional flexibilities beyond that deadline. So how do you learn more? So on the left side of the screen, and again, this PDF will be in the YouTube description when we upload this, and we'll send an email out when the video is available. But I'd recommend, if you're going to start benchmarking for folks, read our benchmarking guide. It is specific to our state's program, and is really all you need to know about benchmarking and doing energy exclusions for your clients. We also have an FAQ available online that will give you a good scope of the program and understand the critical points. We have a newsletter available where we send out updates and all you need to know about changes to the program or new working groups that are coming online. That YouTube playlist is a great resource, which we sent in the chat earlier. And then our web pages is a great resource as well for finding basically everything we've published for the program to assist building owners in getting started. Additionally, so we're with the Maryland Department of the Environment. Our sister agency, the Maryland Energy Administration, has developed a Clean Buildings Hub. If you're working in other jurisdictions, there's some of these types of hubs popping up around the country, but this is kind of a first mile technical assistance and resource for building owners and representatives to go to say, hey, I'm an office space. What incentives are available to me? What grants are available to me? And so I'd really recommend tuning into that Clean Buildings Hub. They have a newsletter as well that's really great. They just released one today, actually. So with really great resources for folks both in Maryland and outside of Maryland. So I'd recommend staying tuned into that. And finally, if you need to contact our team, you can email us at beps.mde@maryland.gov or give us a call at 410-537-3183. And so with that, I think I'll hand it over to Zach to walk through some tips and tricks for you, just as you're getting started with your clients, or maybe you're already along the way and just need some advice. So take it away, Zach.
Great. Thanks, Sam. And thank you all for joining us again today. Thanks again for joining us today. So just a couple of tips or tricks, and these are basically, some lessons learned from lots of folks we've been dealing with. Wanted to share them. It's kind of a potpourri of them, and then we'll definitely get into questions. But a couple of things. First of all, if you're submitting a UBID request, so if your building is not listed on the BEPS portal or the covered buildings map, but it is a 35,000 square foot or larger building, you need to submit a UBID request through the BEPS portal. When you do that, you actually provide the latitude and the longitude of the building. And that helps us ensure that we can actually grab the correct footprint for your building. And we've been finding a lot of those are not accurate. They're in the wrong state sometimes. So just be extra careful, because if that gets messed up, it delays our ability to respond back to you and get you the data. We're pretty quick about generating those, but it does take a little bit of time. But if we have to go back, we look at it and we're like, this seems wrong, or that's not in the right place, that's going to slow things down. And so the directions for how to get it are in the form. It's pretty straightforward. You can get it on Google Maps. Please make sure you do that right. And I'll just also note, in that new UBID request form, if there's some situations where when we review that, right, somebody is actually going to look at your form in our compliance team and review the submission you've made. And if they look at that and they say, that doesn't make any sense, if that might be the case, please, but there's a reason why. The thing that we get sometimes is, there's two buildings and they're separate, but they've got shared metering. You're going to actually submit, and neither one of them is currently on our list. That's one covered building. You're going to submit a UBID request for that. And that's fine. You just actually need to tell us that that's the case, so we don't look at it and we're like, why are you submitting something like this? And so what you can do is actually, when you submit the UBID request, you can respond to the email that you get. You'll get an auto-generated email, thanks for submitting this request. If you reply to that email, put in the address again for that building, just so we make sure we're always clear on what we're doing, and then tell us this is two buildings metered together. In most of the other forms, we actually have a text box for you to put in. It's not in that form, and it just is what it is right now. So just reply to that email with any additional details that might help us as we're generating that UBID. That also happens sometimes if you're submitting a totally new, there's a multifamily property with 3 buildings. None of them are currently listed, and you're submitting them. They're all over 35K. This happens. Our data isn't complete from the state's tax data, so we know we've missed buildings. We found a lot through folks submitting. So just tell us, oh, these are all actually, this is one multifamily building, complex that's complying as a single covered building, and you can submit that if they are not at all listed. If one of them is already listed, you can use our campus compliance forms to do that. It's a lot more straightforward in there. So just a couple of different ways to get at it. And speaking of campuses, we have this campus compliance pathway, and there's kind of 2 different ways into it. I think it causes a lot of confusion. Portfolio Manager has a couple of property types that can be benchmarked as campuses. This is all in our benchmarking guide. So again, go back to that. 8 times out of 10, when someone sends us an email asking us a question about something, we send them right back to the page in the benchmarking guide with this information. It's lengthy, but it's also broken out by the sections that you might need. So each section is pretty short. But with campuses, when you do this, when you share with us, you're going to either share, you're either going to benchmark individually only the 35,000 square feet buildings, in which case we don't care about campus compliance. You're just saying, I'm sharing this building or that building or that building, or you're benchmarking a bunch of them together. If you benchmark them together as a campus, you go through this campus compliance form on our BEPS portal, and then you're only going to share the parent property with us. You need to roll up all the energy data from the children properties and only share that parent. We're getting a lot of parents and children shared, and that messes things up on our back end because we don't know which one we're looking at. And so that's where you're only going to share the parent, or you're only going to share the children. You can still have on your end a parent property if you've got for example, a shopping center is a common one, where there might be 3 or 4 covered buildings, but you think about it as one shopping center. You are going to share with us maybe just the individual buildings, but you'll keep the parent on your end to roll it up for your own internal reporting. So those are just a couple of tips and tricks as you think about them. And speaking of UBIDs, again, these UBID pieces are all kind of new for folks, and it's a little different in every jurisdiction. That UBID it's actually a national number. It's based on the geospatial data, so you can create a UBID anywhere in the world. So there's a specific place to enter it in Portfolio Manager as a standard ID. Again, those instructions are in the benchmarking guide, but you can only put in one UBID per Portfolio Manager property. We've gotten a lot of these where people will put in, 1 UBID, 2 UBIDs, 3 UBIDs. If you've got 3 UBIDs that you're trying to share, you need to use the campus compliance form to aggregate them. And we're using that campus compliance form to submit for campus compliance and to submit for UBID aggregation. If we said, oh, we think there's 3 covered buildings, and you say, no, this is 1 covered building, use that campus compliance form to submit it to us, and we'll aggregate the UBIDs. And then you'll get a single new UBID to put in your portfolio manager entry for this and share it with us. That portfolio manager entry, when you put that UBID in, there can be no spaces, no commas, no quotation marks. Copy and paste that UBID directly from the BEPS portal or from the email we send it to you, put it in. If we don't get a good UBID, it will not match with our system. And when the deadline rolls around, we will not be able to update the portal for you and say that that building is in compliance. And so it's really critical that you get that right. And then I think with that, we'll get into the Q&A here.
All right. Thank you, Zach, for those tips and tricks. And thank you all for submitting questions. Again, if you joined late, the Q&A feature, if you'd like to submit a question, is in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Looks like 9 dots in a square. You hover over it, it says Meeting Tools. You'll click on that, and you'll select Q&A and submit your thoughts there. But we do have a few in here already, so we're going to head and try and address these. So first things first, are all years stated here calendar year or reporting years? I think that's probably in reference to that payment distribution chart earlier on with the alternative compliance payments. But let's say this is all in referencing the calendar years and would be demonstrated by compliance in the following year. So let's say building owner Jane, she'd be benchmarking her 2030 energy use by June 1st of 2031, and any alternative compliance payments would be assessed at that time in 2031, but it is based on the 2030 calendar year data. So thank you for that question. Next up, we've got what types of facilities are exempted from the BPS. So just go to that slide real quick in case you missed it. The main 6 that are exempt or can apply for exemption from the program are designated as historic buildings. They have to be individually designated by state, federal, local law, K-12 schools, manufacturing, agricultural, demolished, and federally owned buildings. Additionally, starting on October 1st, hospitals will also be able to apply for total exemption.
And I'll just add in, we got a separate question later about our higher education, colleges and universities exempt. The answer is no. Elementary and secondary schools are the only educational facilities that are exempt. So just want to clarify that here too.
Thank you, Zach. And next up, how soon do new UBIDs get added to the BEPS portal? Great question. So our compliance program is in charge of generating those new UBIDs, and they are generating and turning them around within usually 2 weeks. It can take a little bit longer for the UBID to appear on the BEPS portal itself, on that covered buildings list, but they will email you with that generated UBID, normally within 2 weeks. And so, as soon as you get that email from the compliance team, you can just copy and paste that number and add it right into your benchmarking report. You don't need to wait for it to be added to the covered buildings list. The only time that it will matter that it's added to the list, beyond the date it's generated, is if you're working to submit an exemption form. You won't be able to submit that form until the UBID is actually listed on the covered buildings list. So thank you for that. We got a question about, could you provide a few examples of the care category of building type? And I think we're not really sure what type of building you're referencing here. We aren't familiar with the care category, but we would refer you to the portfolio manager glossary of property types. We we do follow portfolio manager's guidance, most of the time. Zach, I saw you come off mute if you want to add something.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that's not a defined property type in portfolio manager. So we're not really sure what you mean by that. But the guidance, especially for like where you should allocate a property, is this a office building? Is this a medical office building? Like, how do you define those things? This is a nursing home. Those things, the definitions are in portfolio manager's glossary, and that's what we're going to use. And you can actually see in the BEPS regulation, which is linked on our website, we have the 83 property types from portfolio manager are all in there as well.
Thank you, Zach, and thank you for that question. Cruising through here. Thank you all for submitting. Next one, the $100 fee per building starts with 2025 data, so next year's reporting, correct? How does the building owner pay the $100 fee per building? So you're correct that the $100 reporting fee will not be assessed for this, this deadline that's coming up in a week. It will start next year. As far as how the building owner pays that $100 fee, we would suggest you sign up for our email lists so you can receive updates on how that process will take place next year and beyond. But thank you for that question. What will the penalty be for non-compliance? So as we talked about, for the emissions payment or the emissions standard, there is an alternative compliance payment available for excess emissions over the standards. So that alternative compliance payment is only available for the net direct emissions standards. For other requirements, like the benchmarking requirement, I can go back to this slide where we talked about that. The benchmarking requirement or not benchmarking by the deadline would be considered a violation against the regulation, and enforcement may range from warnings to fees. I do not have an exact amount for the penalty. If that is assessed for the violation, it will be determined on a case-by-case basis by our compliance program. But that is how it would work for other requirements besides the net direct emissions standard, which has its own designated payment structure. Okay, let's see. And just a reminder, if you missed it earlier, if you got to submit a question, bottom right-hand corner of the screen, 9 dots in a square, click there and select Q&A, and you can submit what you're thinking. So let's see. Let me see. Is there going to be a list of approved benchmarking providers that will highlight capable firms? So great question. There is not a list available at this time from the state. I would suggest you stay apprised of that Clean Buildings Hub resource that I pitched at the end of the webinar. Again, this resource is being developed to assist building owners in many facets of building decarbonization, including technical assistance and finding resources to benchmark and also make improvements to their property. So regarding that, I would say stay tuned into the Clean Buildings Hub for updates from them on resources like that type of a list. But additionally, we do refer folks to Energy Star's service provider directory if they are looking for outside assistance with benchmarking requirements. All right, moving right along here. Thanks for all these questions. Let's see. Is there a deadline for determining a compliance pathway like Washington? Zach, would you want to take that one?
Yeah, happy to take this one. So no, so it's a different setup here than in Washington in that the way that the program is currently structured, you have to meet the as it's currently in the regulation GHG requirements starting in 2030 in that kind of stepping down standard. And if you're not meeting it, you make an alternative compliance payment, and that's actually made, in the year for when it's done. So you wouldn't have to do something ahead of time. We're a few years out, so we haven't settled down on the exact setup, but the idea is basically, if you're over the standard, we make that determination, and then you can, and then you would pay that. You're over the standard, so you have to pay this many dollars because you're, 3 tons over, so it's $230 times 3 tons in 2030, for example. So that basically is very much in the moment for the year, and that's going to just happen each year. And that allows, if a building is performing poorly, and then you make a kind of, even if we're kind of in it's not really cycles like you have in some of the other jurisdictions, but we're in one of those, interim standard 1, for example. If you make improvements in the middle of that, it will reflect in the second year of interim standard 1 that your GHG emissions have reduced. So that's the way that it's set up. It's not a specific deadline.
Thank you, Zach, and thanks for that question. Really appreciate all these questions. This is good engagement here. Appreciate it. Next up, we've got which county is exempt from BEPS, and can you provide more information about that situation? Sure. So determined during this previous legislative session in the state of Maryland in 2025, a specific exemption language was added into a House bill that passed the legislative session, House Bill 49, BEPS Alterations and Analysis, and that specific exemption language stated that buildings in Montgomery County, which are have their own BPS program at the county level, will be waived from the statewide program starting on October 1st of this year. All those changes from that House bill start on October 1st. Regarding that situation, buildings that are either, if you, let's say you're benchmarking for buildings in Montgomery County, if they are already benchmarking with the county and they are in compliance with the county for this year, then they do not need to submit a benchmarking report to the state for this year. If they are not in compliance with the county, or they're not covered by the county and they're covered by us, then they would have to submit a benchmarking report to us by September 30th. But again, the House bill situation states that buildings in Montgomery County will be waived from the program starting October 1st, but we are still legally required to collect that information for this reporting year, that 2024 data. So that's just how that process works and where that exemption came from. All right, moving right along.
Yeah, Sam, we got a clarification on that care, and that was okay. Sharp. We got eagle eyes in the audience today. That was a label on our like property types, and that's a really old slide. Actually, we're waiting until once we get past September 30th, we're going to update our numbers for that one. But that care is actually from our tax data, and it's kind of a really broad category that doesn't align at all with portfolio manager, but it's basically things like medical offices, rehab facilities. I think senior living might get stuck in there. It's a whole bunch of stuff. It doesn't really matter for portfolio manager. The point was basically to show you that offices and multifamily are the biggest property types, and there's a few others down there. But that's not a portfolio manager property type. It's not in the regulation. It was just a kind of generic catch-all that our state tax department uses for certain kind of groupings of property types. So hopefully we didn't cause mass confusion there. Eagle eyes. Nobody's asked us about that one before.
Yeah, thank you, Zach, and yeah, thanks for picking that out for us. That'll be something that's a good reference for the future. So thank you. And then, what are the required utilities to report? So building owners are required to provide us with whole building aggregate energy use for the covered building. So all energy used on site electric, gas, oil, any delivered fuels, propane, as well as if the building is connected to a district energy system and they're being delivered thermal products from a central plant, the energy use and emissions from those products will also have to be included. This program does not require any types of water or sewer or utilities like that. It is solely focused on energy use at the site of the building. And let's see. So we got a question. I understand parking lots and outdoor heated pools are excluded use spaces, but if they are not separately metered, you should still include them. Is that correct? So if you're right that those are excludable use spaces, if they are not separately metered, let's say they're sub-metered, you'd have to, there is a process available for removing that energy use still from the report by using a negative meter. And that's available in the benchmarking guide if you need to make those exclusions. If they're not sub-metered, there's an estimation available for some of these exclusions that you can use to estimate that use and still take advantage of that exclusion. And so all of that is highlighted in the benchmarking guide, which we dropped in the chat. Yeah, Zach, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I'll just say, like, for some of those where if you don't have that metering, it gets generated by portfolio manager and will exclude it on the back end. But again, all that details, there's a whole section on exclusions in the benchmarking guide, and it lays out each of these different, is it sub-metered, separately metered, not metered at all, and just go read through that. It's really, the guide is long because we tried to be extensive with that documentation.
Thank you, Zach. And we've got, I think, one more question and 1 minute left. So let's see if we can tackle this one real quick. When requesting data from a utility provider, I have entered a UBID number that was provided by the BEPS team, but the utility provider website gives me an error stating that they do not recognize the UBID number for that property. Zach, would you want to take that one?
Yeah, send us an email at the beps.mde@maryland.gov with send us any emails or screenshots you have of that. That's kind of an odd case, but we could definitely, that's a follow-up. We have contact information in our utility data guide to request, to follow up with the utility providers. So if you've gotten a UBID from us, you should be able to do that and request it from them. If there's an issue, please email us and our compliance team can work through it. And Sam, I saw a last minute one come in there. Someone asked, is just energy consumption required? What about water use? Water use is not required to be benchmarked for Maryland BEPS, just energy use. So yes, sneak that one in there. All right, I'll let you close out.
Thanks for catching that one. And thanks everyone for all of your great questions and for tuning in today. Really appreciate you being here, and take note of that YouTube playlist that we dropped in the chat earlier. That is where we're going to be uploading this recording, and also relevant links and resources that we talked about today. They'll be in the description of that YouTube video. But we hope you can join us for future webinars, and especially that third-party verification webinar near the end of October. I'm sorry, it's actually October 29th. I think I said the 23rd earlier, but that's October 29th at 10 a.m. And so we hope to see you there. Thanks for tuning in, and hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.